It was upon a dark, foggy November evening, not long after my return from my second Afghan campaign, that I found my friend Sherlock Holmes in a state of profound ennui. He sat slumped in his great armchair, his long, thin fingers steepled before him, his eyes closed, and his countenance so haggard and listless that he might have been mistaken for a man on the very brink of dissolution. The air in our Baker Street lodgings was thick with the acrid tang of one of his more volatile chemical experiments, a scent I had come to associate with his blackest moods. For days the newspapers had been devoid of anything to pique his singular interest. The criminal world of London, it seemed, had sunk into a state of regrettable mediocrity. "The world is weary, Watson," he sighed without opening his eyes. "Utterly and irredeemably weary. Can you recall a single case of genuine intellectual interest in the past month? A bank manager who absconds with the petty cash, a publican's wife who pilfers from the till. It is the domain of the constabulary, not the consulting detective. My mind rebels at stagnation. Give me problems, give me work, give me the most abstruse cryptogram or the most intricate analysis, and I am in my own proper atmosphere. But I abhor the dull routine of existence. I crave for mental exaltation." Before I could offer some placating remark, Mrs. Hudson entered, bearing a card upon a silver salver. Holmes, with a groan of resignation, took the card and glanced at it. His languor vanished in an instant. A spark of interest, the first I had seen in a week, ignited in his grey eyes. "Lord Darlington," he read aloud, his voice now crisp and alert, "of Darlington Hall, Northamptonshire. This may at least possess the merit of having a well-heeled client. Show him up, Mrs. Hudson." Our visitor, when he was ushered in, was a man who seemed to carry the weight of the world upon his shoulders. He was tall and aristocratic in his bearing, with a finely chiselled nose and a square jaw, but his face was pale and drawn, and his eyes, full of a hunted expression, darted nervously about our cluttered sitting-room. He clutched a fine Malacca cane in a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Holmes?" he asked, his voice a low, strained whisper. "I am Lord Darlington. I have come to you in a matter of the utmost delicacy, a matter of such profound and terrible significance that I dare not entrust it to any other soul in England." Holmes motioned him to the armchair opposite. "You are in distress, my lord. Pray be seated and compose yourself. Watson and I are at your service. The more delicate and profound the matter, the more it is to my taste." Lord Darlington sank into the chair, though he seemed incapable of relaxing. He leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly over the head of his cane. "Mr. Holmes," he began, "I am the victim of a circumstance so grotesque, so monstrous, that it threatens to destroy not only my name and my sanity, but the very succession of one of England's oldest titles. To put it bluntly, sir, I have reason to believe that the young man who is my son and heir is not my son at all." I confess I gave a start at this astonishing declaration. Holmes, however, merely leaned back, his eyes half closed, a faint, thin smile playing upon his lips. "A substitution," he murmured, "and a scandal, if I am not mistaken. Pray continue, Lord Darlington. This affair already presents certain features of interest." "You grasp it at once," cried our client. "Yes, a substitution. My son, the Honourable Arthur Neville, Viscount St. Clair, is, I believe, an impostor. And someone, Mr. Holmes, knows the truth. Someone has begun to blackmail me." He withdrew a trembling hand from his breast pocket and produced a single sheet of cheap, common paper. It was folded and slightly soiled. Holmes took it and flattened it out upon the table under the glare of the gaslight. The message was brief, composed of words cut from a newspaper and pasted clumsily onto the sheet. It read, "The fruit of the wrong tree grows in the great house. The gardener knows. £1,000 will keep the soil unturned." "This arrived in yesterday's Morning Post," Lord Darlington explained. "There was no postmark of note, merely a London smudge. It is the crudity of it, the sheer vulgarity, that makes it so terrifying." "The reference to the gardener is suggestive," Holmes remarked, examining the note with his pocket lens. "And the demand, while substantial, is not so high as to suggest a professional hand. This is the work of an amateur, driven by greed and, I suspect, a long-held secret. Now, my lord, you must tell us everything. Omit no detail, however trifling it may seem to you. When and how do you believe this substitution took place?" Lord Darlington passed a hand over his brow, a sheen of perspiration visible in the lamplight. "It happened 21 years ago," he said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. "My wife, Lady Beatrice, was a woman of a delicate constitution. Her nerves were not strong. She had endured 2 stillbirths before Arthur was born, and the family physicians had warned me that another such tragedy might break her mind entirely. The birth was a difficult one. I was in London on urgent parliamentary business, summoned by telegram. When I returned 2 days later, I was met by a jubilant household and my wife, pale but radiant, with a healthy, beautiful baby boy in her arms. Arthur. And you had no suspicions at the time?" "None whatsoever. I was overjoyed. The Darlington line was secure. My wife doted upon the boy, obsessively so. It was only after her death, some 10 years ago, that I began to notice certain discrepancies." "Discrepancies?" Holmes prompted, his eyes gleaming with intellectual hunger. "The boy, as he grew, bore no resemblance to me, nor to my wife, nor to any Darlington or Neville for 300 years of portraiture. We are a family of dark hair and sharp aquiline features. Arthur is fair, blue-eyed, with a gentle, almost artistic temperament. He has no love for the hunt, no mind for estate management. He spends his days composing poetry and studying botany. A fine young man, Mr. Holmes, with a heart of gold, but he is no Darlington. The old blood does not run in his veins. I feel it as an unshakable, instinctual truth." "Instinct is a poor substitute for evidence, my lord," said Holmes coolly. "What else?" "There were whispers. After my wife's death, I was sorting through her personal effects and found a series of entries in her private diary. They were cryptic, filled with anguish. She spoke of a terrible secret, a noble sin committed to save us all. She mentioned a debt that could never be repaid to a woman named Hobson. And then there is this." He reached into his coat again and produced a small, faded photograph, a daguerreotype of a woman in a nurse's uniform. She was a plain woman with a square, determined jaw and dark, intelligent eyes. "This is Martha Hobson," said Lord Darlington. "She was the midwife who attended my wife during the birth, a local woman of good repute. She left the village quite suddenly a month after Arthur was born, saying she was going to relatives in Australia. We never heard from her again." Holmes took the photograph and studied it intently. "The gardener knows," he mused, tapping the blackmail note. Could this Hobson woman have been the gardener who planted the wrong seed? It is a plausible line of inquiry. Tell me of the circumstances of the birth. Who else was in attendance? Only our family physician, Dr. Armitage, who is long dead, and a young housemaid who was dismissed shortly thereafter for some trivial infraction. My wife managed everything. She insisted on having the birth in the old nursery wing, away from the main part of the house, citing a need for absolute quiet. "Convenient," Holmes murmured. "And this wing, is it still as it was?" "Largely, yes. It has been unused for years." "Then, my lord, our course is clear. Watson and I shall accompany you to Darlington Hall tomorrow. I must see this nursery. I must see the family portraits. And I must, above all, meet the young man who stands to inherit your name and fortune. The solution to this puzzle lies not in the present, but in the echoes of the past, and I intend to make them speak." Our journey to Northamptonshire the following morning was a silent one. Lord Darlington was lost in his own bleak thoughts, and Holmes sat opposite, his head sunk upon his chest, his eyes closed, though I knew from long experience that his mind was working at a furious pace, sifting and weighing every fact that had been presented to him. Darlington Hall was a magnificent pile, a sprawling Tudor mansion of red brick and grey stone, set amidst acres of manicured parkland. It spoke of centuries of wealth and power. Yet, as we drew up the long gravel drive, I sensed a pall of melancholy hanging over the place, a silent sorrow that even the crisp autumn sunshine could not dispel. We were met at the door by a stern, white-haired butler who informed us that the Viscount was in the library. As we were divesting ourselves of our coats, a young man emerged from a doorway down the hall. He was of medium height, with a sensitive, handsome face, a head of wavy blonde hair, and eyes of a startlingly clear blue. He was the very picture of a young English aristocrat, and yet, having heard Lord Darlington's description, I could immediately see the discordance. He possessed none of the hawk-like intensity of his supposed father. "Father," he said with a warm, gentle smile, "you have returned, and you have brought guests. Arthur, these gentlemen are Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson," Lord Darlington said, his voice stiff and formal. "They are here to assist me with a matter concerning some historical documents." The young man, Arthur, bowed politely. "A pleasure, Mr. Holmes. I have, of course, read of your remarkable work. Should you require any assistance with the family archives, I am at your disposal. The history of this house is a particular passion of mine." "That is most kind of you, my lord," said Holmes, his gaze sweeping over the young man in a single, comprehensive glance. "Perhaps you would be so good as to allow us to view the gallery of family portraits. Your father has spoken of them, and I have a professional interest in the study of heredity." The request was a strange one, but Arthur complied readily enough. He led us to a long, oak-panelled gallery, where generations of Darlingtons stared down at us from their gilded frames. Stern-faced men in ruffs and armour, elegant ladies in silk and satin, proud cavaliers and grim-faced Puritans. And in every single one, without exception, one could trace the same defining features: the dark, piercing eyes, the aquiline nose, the air of commanding authority. We came to the final portrait, a recent one of Lord Darlington himself, looking every inch the patrician nobleman. Beside it, the empty space on the wall, where his heir's portrait would one day hang, seemed like a gaping question. Arthur stood beside us, a thoughtful expression on his face. "It is a formidable lineage," he said softly. Sometimes I feel the weight of all these ancestors upon me. I often wonder if I am truly worthy to follow in their footsteps. I glanced at Lord Darlington, whose face had become a mask of stone. The young man's innocent words were, for him, a dagger thrust of bitter irony. "An interesting study in atavism," Holmes remarked blandly, turning away from the portraits. "Now, Lord Darlington, I should be much obliged if you would show me the old nursery wing." We left the young Viscount in the gallery and followed our client up a winding staircase to a dusty, forgotten corridor in the west wing of the house. The air was cold and still. He unlocked a heavy oak door, and we stepped into a suite of rooms that had clearly not been disturbed for many years. Dust sheets covered the furniture, and the air was thick with the scent of decay and faded memories. "This was the nursery," Lord Darlington said, his voice hushed. "The birth took place in the adjoining room." Holmes moved about the room like a bloodhound on a scent, his keen eyes darting everywhere. He paid no attention to the larger objects, but bent down to examine the floorboards, scraped at the peeling paint on the window frame with his penknife, and peered up the cavernous soot-blackened chimney. "The fire was lit, even in summer," he observed, "for the boiling of water, no doubt. And this window, it does not overlook the main drive, but a small secluded courtyard at the rear of the house. A carriage could come and go from here entirely unobserved." He moved into the smaller adjoining chamber, where a great four-poster bed stood shrouded in white. He pulled back the sheet and ran his fingers over the dark, polished wood of the headboard. "You said your wife was of a delicate, nervous disposition," he said, turning to Lord Darlington. "Was she prone to fainting spells, hysterics?" "She was," our client admitted. "Dr. Armitage prescribed a powerful laudanum tincture for her nerves, which she kept by her bedside at all times." "I see." Holmes's expression told me nothing, but I knew he had found something of significance. He paced the room for a moment before turning back to us. "My preliminary examination of this wing is complete. There is one other person I must speak to. Your butler, you said his name was Jennings. How long has he been in your service?" "All his life," said Lord Darlington. "He was born on the estate. He is the soul of discretion and loyalty." "Excellent. Loyalty can be a great virtue, but it can also be the lock on a door behind which secrets are kept. I should like to have a word with Mr. Jennings. Alone." The interview with the butler took place in the library, a vast book-lined chamber that smelled of old leather and beeswax. Holmes had requested that Lord Darlington and I remain out of sight in an adjoining study, with the door left slightly ajar. Jennings was a man of immense dignity, standing straight and tall despite his advanced years. His face was impassive as Holmes began his questioning, which at first seemed aimless and rambling, touching upon the history of the house, the weather, and the duties of a butler in a great household. Then, quite suddenly, Holmes leaned forward. "Jennings," he said, his voice sharp as a rapier. 21 years ago, on the night the young Viscount was born, a housemaid was dismissed. What was her name?" The butler's composure did not waver, but I saw his old hands clenched tightly at his sides. "I believe her name was Sarah, sir. I do not recall her surname." "A trivial infraction," Lord Darlington told me. "What was it, exactly?" "She was found to have stolen a silver locket belonging to her ladyship." "And was the locket recovered?" "No, sir. The girl swore her innocence, but her ladyship was insistent. She was sent away without a reference. Sent away where, Jennings? To London, I believe, sir. She had family there. And did it not strike you as odd, Jennings, that Lady Darlington, a woman known for her kindness and charity, would be so harsh over a mere trinket, especially towards a young girl on the very night her long-awaited heir was born? The butler remained silent, his lips a thin, pale line. "I put it to you, Jennings," Holmes continued, his voice relentless, "that there was no theft. I put it to you that this girl, Sarah, saw something she was not meant to see. Something that took place in that nursery wing. Something involving her ladyship and the midwife, Martha Hobson. And that the locket was not stolen, but given to her as payment for her silence, along with a threat of what would happen should she ever speak of it." Still, the butler said nothing. His loyalty was, as his master had said, absolute. "Very well, Jennings," Holmes sighed, rising from his chair. "You have served your master well, but let me tell you this. A terrible injustice was done all those years ago. Now, a second injustice, that of blackmail, has been built upon the first. Lord Darlington is in great distress. If your silence contributes to his ruin, your loyalty will have been a poor investment indeed. That will be all." After the butler had departed, his proud shoulders stooped just a little, Holmes rejoined us. "We are dealing with a conspiracy of silence, Watson," he said. "Lord Darlington's late wife, the midwife Hobson, and this butler Jennings. They all played a part. The girl Sarah is the weak link. She was a witness, not a participant. She was paid and frightened into silence. Our next task is to find her." "But how, Holmes?" I cried. "It was over 2 decades ago. Sarah who? In a city of millions." "It is a challenge," he admitted, a glint in his eye, "but not an insurmountable one. I have my methods. We must return to London at once. My lord," he said, turning to our client, "you must act as if nothing is amiss. Do not respond to the blackmailer. Let him think his threat has been ignored. It will force him to make the next move. Now, Watson, the game is afoot." Back in our Baker Street rooms, Sherlock Holmes embarked upon one of the most remarkable campaigns of inquiry I have ever witnessed. He dispatched a veritable army of his Baker Street irregulars, those ragged street urchins who knew the labyrinth of London better than any policeman, with a description of the missing housemaid. He placed carefully worded advertisements in the agony columns of a dozen newspapers, ostensibly from a solicitor seeking a Sarah, formerly in service in Northamptonshire, regarding a small inheritance. For 3 days there was nothing. Holmes grew tense and impatient, consuming vast quantities of shag tobacco and scraping furiously upon his violin at all hours of the night. Then, on the 4th morning, a reply came. It was a grimy, tear-stained letter, written in a barely literate hand. It was from a woman who signed herself Sarah Dawkins, now a widow living in a squalid tenement in Whitechapel. She agreed to meet with our solicitor. Holmes chose to go in disguise, dressed as a benevolent, white-haired nonconformist minister, a role he played with sanctimonious perfection. He insisted I accompany him, for he feared the woman might be in some danger. We found Mrs. Dawkins in a single wretched room, which she shared with her 3 small underfed children. She was a thin, worn-out woman whose face still held the ghost of a former prettiness. She was clearly terrified, but the lure of a non-existent inheritance had been too strong to resist. "You were Sarah," in service at Darlington Hall?" Holmes began, his voice full of pious sympathy. The woman nodded, twisting her apron in her hands. "I want you to tell me what happened on the night the Viscount was born," Holmes said, his tone hardening slightly. The woman gasped and shrank back. I swore I'd never tell. Her ladyship, she made me swear on the Bible." "Her ladyship is dead," Holmes said gently. "But the secret is not. It is hurting innocent people. A great wrong was done, and you alone can help us set it right. Tell me what you saw." And so the story came tumbling out, a torrent of fear and guilt that had been dammed up for 21 years. "Her ladyship's baby was born just after midnight," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with the memory. "It was a boy. But he was wrong. So small and blue, misshapen. He gave a tiny, weak cry, and then nothing. He was dead, sir. Stillborn." "Go on," Holmes urged. "Her ladyship, she let out a scream, the likes of which I have never heard. Then she fainted dead away. Dr. Armitage tried to revive her, and the midwife, Mrs. Hobson, she took charge. She wrapped the poor dead babe in a blanket and said to me, 'This will kill her ladyship. The master is away. We must be strong for her.' Then she went to the window, the one overlooking the back court, and she waved a lamp 3 times. And what happened then? A few minutes later there was a scratching at the courtyard door. Mrs. Hobson went down and came back with a bundle. It was another baby, sir. A healthy, crying baby boy. She put him in the cradle, and when her ladyship came to, Mrs. Hobson put the live baby in her arms. She told her that she had fainted and that her son was well and strong. Her ladyship was so overjoyed, so delirious, she didn't question it. She just wept and held the child. And the other baby? The dead one? Mrs. Hobson took it away in the same basket the new one had arrived in. She told me the master must never know, that the shock would destroy his wife. She gave me a beautiful silver locket and 5 sovereigns. She said if I ever breathed a word, she would say I'd stolen them and I'd be sent to prison. The next day, her ladyship told my lord that I was a thief and I was sent packing. The picture was now complete in its tragic detail. A desperate act born of love and fear. "One last question, Mrs. Dawkins," Holmes said. "This midwife, Martha Hobson, did you ever hear her speak of her own family?" "She had a sister, I think," the woman replied. "A married sister who lived somewhere near Reading. Mrs. Hobson was a widow herself, and I heard she had a baby of her own, a little boy, born not long before she came to the hall." The final piece clicked into place. I looked at Holmes and saw in his face that he had now grasped the entire terrible truth. "Watson," he said, as our hansom cab rattled back towards Baker Street, "the substitution is proven. Lady Darlington's child died and was replaced by another. And whose child would a midwife substitute for a lord's, if not her own? Martha Hobson passed off her own son as the Darlington heir." "Good heavens, Holmes," I exclaimed. "Then the Viscount is the son of a village midwife, and the blackmailer, the gardener, who knows the truth. Who else could it be but Martha Hobson herself, returned from her fictional trip to Australia to reap a late harvest from the seed she planted all those years ago? So we must find her. We must. I have already sent a telegram to the constabulary in Reading, inquiring about a Mrs. Hobson or a woman of her description who lived there some 20 years ago. But there is another thread to this tangled skein, Watson. What became of Martha Hobson's sister? And more importantly, what became of the true Darlington heir, the poor soul who was thought to be stillborn? This last question hung in the air between us, a chilling and unexpected complication. We had solved the mystery of the substitution, but in doing so had uncovered another, potentially darker secret. The reply from Reading arrived that evening. It informed Holmes that a woman answering Martha Hobson's description had indeed lived for a time with her sister, a Mrs. Gable. Mrs. Gable had died 5 years previously, but her husband, a retired railway signalman, still lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of the town. The next morning found us on a train to Reading. We found Mr. Gable tending his roses in a small, neat garden. He was a stooped, gentle old man who was initially reluctant to speak of his late sister-in-law. "Martha? Oh, she was a strange one," he said, snipping a dead head from a rose bush. "Ambitious, always felt she was meant for better things than being a midwife. She left her boy, Thomas, with us when he was just a babe, said she had a position in a great house up north. Came back a month later with a pocket full of money, took the boy, and we never saw her again. Heard she'd gone to America." "Her son Thomas," Holmes said carefully. "You said she left him with you. Was he a healthy child?" The old man shook his head sadly. "Not at first. He was a sickly little thing. Weak heart, the doctors said. My wife nursed him day and night. It was a miracle he survived." "I see," Holmes said softly. "Thank you, Mr. Gable. You have been most helpful." As we walked back towards the station, Holmes was silent for a long time. "Do you see it now, Watson?" he said at last, his face grim. "The final, terrible turn of the screw. Martha Hobson had 2 children. One was her own son, Thomas, who was sickly. The other was the Darlington baby, whom she declared stillborn. But what if he wasn't, Watson? What if he was merely weak, blue, struggling for breath? She saw her chance. She took the Lord's son, nursed him back to health as her own, and left her own sickly child to die in the cradle at Darlington Hall. But her child, against all odds, survived, and was raised as the Viscount St. Clair. It was not a substitution of a live baby for a dead one. It was a substitution of one live baby for another. "My God, Holmes," I breathed. "Then the true heir, the real Viscount, is a man named Thomas Hobson, who believes himself to be the son of a midwife, and who has likely grown up in poverty while his birthright was enjoyed by another. And his mother, Martha, is the blackmailer. The circle is complete. All we must do now is find her and her son." Finding them proved to be Holmes's masterstroke. He deduced that a woman with a guilty secret and a modest fortune would not go to America, but would seek anonymity closer to home. He reasoned she would have given her son a good education, to fit him for a station she felt he deserved. Cross-referencing school records with census data, a Herculean task, he finally tracked them to a small, respectable villa in the seaside town of Southport, living under the name Harding. We travelled north at once, accompanied by a grim-faced Lord Darlington, whom Holmes had summoned by telegram. We found the villa, and Holmes, leaving us at the garden gate, strode up to the front door and knocked. The door was opened by a woman in her late 60s. Her hair was grey, but her back was straight, and her dark eyes, which I recognized instantly from the photograph, were as sharp and intelligent as ever. It was Martha Hobson. She did not flinch when Holmes introduced himself. "I have been expecting you, Mr. Holmes," she said calmly, "or someone like you, for 21 years. She led us into a small, over-furnished parlour. Sitting in an armchair by the window was a young man of about 21. He looked up as we entered, and I caught my breath. It was as if one of the portraits from the Darlington Gallery had stepped out of its frame. He had the same dark, piercing eyes, the same aquiline nose, the same air of innate, almost arrogant authority. He was the mirror image of his true father, Lord Darlington, who stood frozen in the doorway, his face a battleground of shock, horror, and a dawning, terrible recognition. "Mother, who are these men?" the young man asked, his voice deep and commanding. Before Martha Hobson could reply, Holmes stepped forward. "My name is Sherlock Holmes," he said, "and I have come to tell you who you are. Your name is not Thomas Harding. It is Arthur Neville, Viscount St. Clair, the true and only son of this gentleman, Lord Darlington." The final confrontation was a storm of emotion. The young man's disbelief warred with the undeniable evidence of his own reflection in his father's face. Lord Darlington was overwhelmed by a tidal wave of grief for his lost years and fury at the woman who had deceived him. And Martha Hobson, the architect of it all, stood firm, a chilling portrait of maternal ambition. "I did what I had to do," she declared, her voice ringing with defiance. "My son was sickly, near death. Your son was strong. I gave your son the life he was born for. I raised him as a gentleman. I used the money you paid me for my silence to give him the education you would have given him. Is he not a credit to me? Is he not every inch a lord?" "You stole my son," roared Lord Darlington. "I saved him," she retorted, "and I gave you a son in return, a gentle, kind boy who has loved you as his father. Have you been so ill-served?" It was then that Holmes played his final card. "You have done more than that, Mrs. Hobson," he said, his voice cold as ice. "You have attempted to profit from your crime. You sent this blackmail note." The woman's composure finally broke. She stared at the note in Holmes's hand, and a flicker of confusion, of genuine surprise, crossed her face. "No," she whispered, "I did not send that. I would never—" "Then who did?" And as Holmes asked the question, all eyes turned to the young man, the true heir. His handsome face had grown dark, and a cunning, resentful light burned in his eyes. "I sent it," he said, his voice thick with bitterness. "I found my mother's letters a month ago. I learned the truth. I deserve my birthright. That pale poetry-reading fool has lived my life for 21 years. I wanted money to start my claim, to hire lawyers to take back what is mine." The scandal had reached its dreadful climax. Here was the true Darlington heir, revealed not as a noble victim, but as a blackmailer, consumed by avarice and resentment. The resolution was as painful and complex as the crime itself. There was no public scandal. Lord Darlington, guided by Holmes's cool logic, saw that to expose the truth would only bring ruin and misery to all, especially to the innocent young man he had raised as his own son. A bargain was struck in that little seaside parlour. The true heir, Thomas, or Arthur, as was his right, was given a substantial fortune and a new life in Canada, on the strict condition that he never return to England or make any claim on the title. His mother, Martha Hobson, her spirit finally broken, went with him into exile. I shall never forget my last sight of Lord Darlington, standing on the platform at Euston Station. He was there to see the young man he had raised, the false heir, who was embarking on a grand tour of Italy, ostensibly to study art. The two men stood for a moment in silence, a gulf of unspoken truths between them. Then the old lord put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "Be well, Arthur," he said, his voice thick with a strange new tenderness. "Be happy. You will always be my son." Back in Baker Street, as the autumn evening closed in, Holmes lit his pipe and reflected on the case. "A singular affair, Watson," he said. "It shows us that the ties of blood can be a terrible chain, and the ties of love a strange and unpredictable force. In the end, which of them is the true heir? The one born to the title, or the one raised to it? I think Lord Darlington has discovered in his own sad way that a son is more than just a name in a family tree." "And the blackmailer, Holmes?" I asked. "It was a remarkable stroke of fortune that you unmasked him." "Fortune had little to do with it," he replied with a twinkle in his eye. "I suspected him from the moment the old signalman told us the child was sickly. The note read, 'The fruit of the wrong tree grows in the great house.' It is the language of a man obsessed with lineage and legitimacy, and it spoke of a gardener. Martha Hobson may have been the one who planted the seed, Watson, but it was her son, the true heir, who was tending the bitter garden of his own resentment." He lapsed into silence then, and as the smoke from his pipe curled up to the ceiling, I knew that his restless mind was already moving on, leaving the tangled passions and sorrows of the Darlington family behind, as he sought out the next logical problem that the great dark city had to offer.